Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome all of you back to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snider, and we are broadcasting live from the beautiful Dillon State Park here in East Central Ohio. Ohio Exopolitics is nonprofit and educational and is covered under the Fair Usage Act. We are coming to you tonight, Saturday, January 26, 2013. We have two great guests, James Horak, who's been on the show several times before. His website is emvsinfo.blogspot.com. And we're waiting for Crystal Clark to call in. And her website is drowninginaabsurdity.wordpress.com. And she's really written an interesting article here of late. But I'm going to go ahead and welcome James to the show. James, how are you this evening?
Fine, Mark. How are you?
Well, we're doing pretty good. We're getting a lot of snow up here in Ohio. How's the weather in Texas?
Well, it's cloudy, overcast, and a little bit cool, but nothing like what you guys have.
Well, first of all, I would like to try to define a term that people often use. I would like to define the New World Order as a secretive power elite with a globalist agenda that is trying to establish an authoritarian world government that will replace sovereign nation states. The New World Order consists of the following people and organizations: international finance institutions like the World Bank and the Federal Reserve, international organizations like the Council on Foreign Relations and the United Nations, rich and powerful families like the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, and the Windsors, and the world's most powerful corporations: Apple, ExxonMobil, PetroChina, ICBC, Nestle's, Microsoft, IBM. And the military-industrial complex is a term used to refer to policy and monetary relationships between legislators, national armed forces, and the defense industrial base that supports them. James, is there anything that you would like to add to my definition of the New World Order, or would you like to comment on the New World Order at all?
Well, I would add that it envisions a feudal fascist police state that is modeled after how the cartel families erect their economic and familial structure. They observe primogeniture, which is a leftover from feudalism, wherein the eldest son has control of the entire family fortune. This places all the leverage in the hands of one person, and he has the ability, if anyone in the family gets out of line, to put them on a very modest stipend, and of course they lose all their servants and they lose their fancy cars and everything until they get back in line. And this has happened before in the Rockefeller family. They had a playboy back in the 20s who went around and was too high profile in all his lady chasing and everything, and so he was warned, didn't heed the warning, and his brother, John D. II, said, okay, you're going to have to get along on $300 a month then.
Wow.
It didn't take long. It didn't take long before he got back in line. That's how it operates.
Wow. Let me see if I got Crystal. Hello, is this Crystal Clark?
It is. How are you?
Hi, Crystal. I want to welcome you to the show. You're kind of new to the show, so I wondered if you could maybe introduce yourself to the audience this evening.
Well, sure. I released my first book in 2009, and it was called Who Are We Really 101, Return of the Shaman. That book is no longer available because I took it off the market to revise it and update it. But the basic premise of the book was built around the understanding that we are making all of the same mistakes that led to the previous 6 cataclysmic self-destruction episodes, and that what generally causes it is the same paradigm we have now, where people don't really understand creational design systems that create, regenerate, and uphold life. And so they become abused, they become weaponized, and the common man, not having any idea how it works, ends up being duped into participating in their own demise. And I was somewhat naive at the time because I thought, well, the alternative media, I'm sure, will be very open to it. But they weren't, because I ultimately found that the alternative scene is really divided itself. On the one side, you have the UFO community, where that's their focus, their main focus. And on the other side, you have the New Age community, and their focus is based on all we have to do is think happy thoughts and it will all go away. So over time, the more I listened to James Horak, the more I realized he was one of the few people out there that was another voice of reason who really understood it. Although, his approach to it was from a little bit different perspective, but he clearly understood that we were at that same place. He was really saying the same thing, but in his own way. So in 2011, I contacted him to begin a dialogue because I think that people who really do understand our predicament need all the help they can get.
James, I would like to hear your kind of overview on these 6 cataclysms that caused the destruction of these 6 previous civilizations, if you could.
Basically, they were pretty much along the same pattern. You were seeded with a caste system to begin with when you came to this planet. And that caste system distorted the technology more and more to maintain the split consciousness because it made the individual more controllable. And it also allowed hypnosis, which is part of it. You can be hypnotized at more levels than the hypnotherapist will tell you. They may not know. But it's obvious that recovered memory is often not adequate because they don't realize that. So in the terms of the devices that still exist, which keep people from being able to stand on their own 2 feet and form their own opinions and on their own minds, the leftovers in the way of this concept of elitism, kings and dynasties, and even presidential dynasties. You have this caste system, this concept of caste system taking over more and more until there's no semblance anymore of anything that is akin to democracy or even free men. And this is what you see developing now, and it always leads to the same thing, total disaster, because in order to implement that final step, once people have had a taste of some degree of equality, a decent life, something better than slavery, it's very hard to put them back in their place. So what do? You destroy the environment, you destroy the industry of the country, based where the stability of the economic system is. You reduce everything down, making the situation more and more desperate. And then the resources, you take the last bit of the finance capital in the form of gold out of the country. They even steal it from nations that have secured it with you. And then you start depopulation. And any time and every time that's happened, there is a mechanism in place which will cause the regulation of the solar activity to be removed, and that's the EMVs. Once that's done, it's just a short matter of time before this planet becomes uninhabitable. And that's the end of the lineage. But I say this, before that happens, it's obvious to most thinking people that this is no longer a suitable place to live, a place where no one will want to live. Even the rat-holed elite that are waiting for the last effects of their poisons and toxins and hostility against the rest of us, useless eaters, to come up on the surface of the earth and face their handiwork, which, of course, they underestimate the damage. They underestimate what it will leave, and they also underestimate the few that will be able to survive and how they have a fixed idea of revenge. So once this happens, and A right-thinking person wouldn't imagine this in their darkest dreams. But once this starts to happen, there is no point in this experiment continuing. It would be very good to see it succeed, to see it go beyond an extinction, because this is going to be the last extinction on Earth.
Let me ask Crystal something. James had said something very interesting there. He said because we have split consciousness, we can be hypnotized at more levels. And you have a website that's basically called Drowning in Absurdity. And I can relate to that because when I look at the president that we have today, just you can set everything aside on a spiritual level, I feel something very extremely negative. It's hard for me to put into words. To me, I can't even listen to him. I can't listen to him talk. I can't watch him on TV. I have to leave the room. I'd like to hear Crystal's thoughts of the Commander-in-Chief and our government in general. Go ahead, Crystal, if you can.
Well, he's a very, very smooth talker. He understands the people's main concerns, and he has found a way, like most psychopaths do, to identify with people on an emotional level. But it very much goes back to that saying, you know them by their deeds. It's not what people say, it's what they do that really matters in the end. And so many people were psychologically manipulated through their emotions because, oh, look, he's one of us. He gets it. He understands our plight, when in fact nothing could be further from the truth. But he had to say that to get people on his side. And many videos have come out where, street reporters go out, and interview just regular people and ask them what they think of Obama. And they say, oh, yes, he's great. We are so happy he's in. But then once the interviewer starts asking them, well, did you know he's passed this law? And that did you know he's doing this? They're really shocked because they don't have any idea, because most of that, of course, is never released through the mainstream media. What he's doing clearly indicates, spirituality is a word that really doesn't mean anything if people can't equate it back to morality. And people get the two confused on purpose. What is the difference between morality and spirituality? There is a difference, and you can't really be a spiritual person and not be a moral person at the same time. And the way he confounds people and confuses people because he behaves as though he's one of us, every action he has taken clearly shows he is not one of us. And in fact, if we look at his development over the years in terms of what we do know, which is very limited, we know that he was groomed for this moment as a CIA asset. And this is the other problem. It doesn't matter if we call it, the dichotomy that we're stuck in. It doesn't matter if we call it the 1% versus the 99% or the breakaway civilization. The fact of the matter is that people who have never actually lived in the real reality that we all live in, which primarily means, the silver spooners. And a good example is, I don't know if you ever saw a series that Paris Hilton used to do where her and her friend would go live with regular families, and she's a silver spooner that does not live in the real world. And at one point she was staying with this family, and she had done something, she had caused a problem, and they said, well, we can go to Walmart tomorrow and get whatever we need to fix it. And she looked at them and she asked, and she was completely serious, do they sell walls there?
Oh, boy.
And you see, these people are so insulated from reality because they have money. They don't know what it's like to have wrinkled hands before their time. They don't know what it's like to have a sore back. They don't know what it's like to have to grow your own food. They're not living in real reality. And I think that is where the real foundation of what people are calling the breakaway civilization stems from. And then this is where the corruption begins, because you have people that are so far above the law, in their view. I mean, how do you deal with that, right? Because these people have infiltrated our government. It's a real problem that people have to address, because you can't possibly believe that your president is one of you when he was running around telling people, you know, hey, you better be nice to me because I'm going to be the president someday? I mean, do you know what I mean?
Sure. Well, to me, it seems like that there's a hypnosis that's falling over the public. And when I saw your website that said Drowning in Absurdity, and that's what I think of when I look at what's going on in the world. And we recently have had a shooting that has gained a whole lot of publicity, and instead of looking for the cause of these strange shootings that are breaking out, it seems that certain elements of our government are immediately calling for gun control. And to me, we have much bigger threats on human life. For example, we have 16 million people starved to death every year, which is about 4,000 people per day. And yet it seems the elite is very concerned about guns right now, and I wanted to get James's thoughts on this whole rush to gun control.
The powers that be can enact such an unconstitutional program. They can take down everything else with regards to the only social contract we have, one that they have if they're in an elected office or if they're in an appointed office. They've sworn to uphold. Not only is a model for undermining the social contract, which is the only thing that grants them legitimacy, but it also is an excellent model for dictatorship and tyranny. Because now, without a social contract and being able to wield such a contradiction, both legal, it's extra legal, they are in the place, they put themselves in the place of a dictatorship. So it isn't even subtle, if you think about it. We have the gun grabbers. The gun grabbers in their little buggy should have had its legs shot off when the news came out about Operation Fast and Furious. Because what is Operation Fast and Furious? It is putting an armament of assault weapons, even grenade launchers, into the hands of the worst drug gang in Mexico. These are the same people that 2 years ago were caught bringing an armament like this, a cache of weapons, into Arizona. They had taken over ranches there and were holding up, and the authorities did their job and went out and found it and confiscated them, and for a while there were pictures of this horde of weapons online. What were they there for? Why would they go and bring weapons across the border into the United States? Well, let me tell you why. These are the thugs that the Obama regime wants to use, along with others, in their house-to-house search and seizure of every American family of the middle class and lower class. For weapons, for any kind of supply of food that'll last you beyond 3 days, and water. And if you're on the list, guess what happens? They'll probably kill you on the spot. That's what it's for. So they got caught. They get caught each time because their Border Patrol, their ATF, didn't do their job. So not everybody's in the back pocket of this regime, and I say regime because they stop being an administration when they stop administering the law.
Very well said, James. Very well said. One of the disturbing things that I've recently learned is that the Department of Homeland Security has purchased 450 million rounds of ammunition. And I wonder, Crystal, if you could guess as to why the Department of Homeland Security would need 450 million rounds of ammunition. That sounds like a lot of terrorists, don't you think?
Well, yeah. And it wasn't just DHS. It was the Social Security Administration and NOAA and a bunch of other people. I think something that I really try hard to teach people is that they have to understand how hiding proper knowledge from them makes them so easy to emotionally manipulate. And in this particular case, first of all, the Sandy Hook thing, and I've done shows about this before, a lot of these people are actors. You can actually go find the companies they work for and look at their profiles. These are actors. These things are not really happening. But if people believe they are, they will respond to the belief. It doesn't have to be real. They just have to believe it's real. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that this was done so that they could get the emotional support they need to have people willingly give up their guns to save the children, right? But the thing that people have not been exposed to for, I would say, at least 2, maybe 3 generations is the historical fact and truth that the pattern historically has been the disarmament of citizens is a precursor to genocide. And you see, hiding that pattern from people, people say, well, people who don't know history are doomed to repeat it. But it's really far more nefarious than that, because the fact of the matter is that the historical patterns in that regard are removed from the collective consciousness through the education system so that they can be repeated because there is intent to repeat it, and to repeat it without resistance. So that's really the predicament that we're in. And I would venture a guess that most people that are saying, oh, yes, we better get these guns off the street to save our children, have absolutely no idea that that is the historical pattern, that they do disarm the people before genocide occurs. It's always been that way. And that was the point, to produce a generation that would not be able to make that connection so that they could do it and do it without resistance. I think that's very important. So, yes, why does the Social Security Administration need that many bullets? I mean, I think there are a couple of different things going on. Obviously, those bullets were intended for use here at home. It's not being sent to the military. It's for civilian use here. Well, is it just a matter of, they want to begin, depopulation and the genocide through a disarmed population, or is it also that they're trying to buy up the stocks of ammunition so that regular people can't get them? But in either case, you're looking at a government that is clearly making moves and choices that are hostile to the population they're supposed to be defending. There's no getting around that.
Very well said. And, well, folks, President Obama is currently using drones to combat terrorism, and I had a listener, might have been After Dark Radio, who made a comment about the use of these drones. And there's something else called the disposition matrix, which the Obama administration is working on. And I think the disposition matrix is basically the Obama administration's global assassination machine. And I'd like to ask James if he could comment on the drones and this global assassination machine that's in place.
Well, you can't have a dictatorship if you can't enforce control on the movement of people and put them under the threat of losing their life if they don't comply. We talk about terrorism. I don't know anything more terrorist than this, than drones, and a hit list, both for use at home as well as abroad. And we already seen that being used on people that are law-abiding. They just are inconvenient to Mr. Obama. So, no. I mean, there comes a point where you have to decide, you have to think clearly, and for your own survival, decide who the real terrorists are.
I would actually like to add to that, if you don't mind, Mark.
Sure, go ahead.
The disposition matrix is a phrase that people don't really understand. And really what this is about, a familiarity with the value that an individual can get out of data mining really has to be addressed. Data mining was initially used by corporations in their marketing departments to determine what kind of emotional manipulation allows them to get deeper into your pockets. For example, they would put out a commercial, and if their sales went up, they could say, okay, well, I know that this particular commercial affected people emotionally enough that they bought more of our product. Well, it began to morph into how do we enlarge our databases? Where do we get the data? And from there it morphed into what we call our surveillance system, which really is about monitoring. And this is important for people to recognize because our patterns of behavior, especially in the electronic age, are all recorded. And this is where the data is drawn from to learn our patterns of behavior. In the marketing sector, it's relatively harmless. But now that we have the government using it, it's not. And the connection that people need to make about this is that a disposition matrix is how they determine your personal views and your personal disposition based on the records of your electronic records of your behavior. What you buy, where you buy it, how much you pay for it, what sites you visit, what doctors you go to, it's all recorded. But the important thing that people have to really understand about this is that when people say, well, why should I care because I don't have anything to hide? What they don't really understand is that the government isn't looking for people breaking the law. That's not what the data mining is for. That's not what the electronic surveillance is for. What it's for is to determine who the heretics and dissenters are, who will become problematic, and try to prevent them from fulfilling their plans and their agendas. That's what it's for. I mean, if you can apply that to what we're talking about in terms of drone strikes, how are those people chosen? They were chosen based on their models of behavior. So what we're talking about is behavior modeling. That's really what it is. I mean, if you consider that the people running our countries are themselves thieves and pedophiles, you can't seriously believe they're looking for people breaking the law. That's not what surveillance is about. It's about picking up on people that are going to be problematic when they try to institute their plans, because those will be the first people that they deal with.
Crystal, it seems that the Obama administration has rebranded many terms that were used during the Bush administration. For example, the global war on terror is now called overseas contingency operations. And I wondered if you could comment on propaganda rebranding.
Well, rebranding is designed to cause confusion. I don't think people really understand how critical the destruction of language is to the emotional manipulation tactics that they use. There's a really, really excellent book that I highly recommend people get. It's called What Orwell Didn't Know, Propaganda and the New Face of American Politics. And I'm going to read a brief snippet of this book because it's really excellent. It says, repeatedly, Orwell returned in his writing to the idea that a state of health in body politic is dependent on a careful and deliberate use of language. Newspeak, used by state propagandists in Orwell's famous futuristic novel 1984, was effective, in Orwell's view, because it had the power to render people incapable of grasping analogies, of failing to perceive logical errors, of misunderstanding the simplest argument, if they are inimical to the official ideology, and of being bored or repelled by any train of thought which is capable of leading in a heretical direction. But what offended Orwell most about this kind of propaganda was that it engenders a protective stupidity. And I think that's so important to understand, and we see this everywhere. You know, how often are mothers rushing to vaccinate their children because the propaganda tells them, well, they're going to get diseases if you don't. But they're damaging their children because they don't know any better. We've seen the same thing with genetically modified foods. It's the only way we can feed all the starving people, but in fact it causes cancer, sterility, and all kinds of other problems. And I think that's what he really meant when he said it engenders a protective form of stupidity. And this is so very true. And I'm sure you've noticed that, you know, there's a push by the powers that be, or whatever term we want to give them, to brand people like us who are awake, and they use the same terms over and over and over. the crazies, the nut jobs, the conspiracy theorists.
Right.
And they're doing that so that we can't wake more people up because they're labeling us as crazy. And I think what's really telling about that is that Kissinger is on record as having said that who they consider terrorists are simply people that don't want to go along with their plans.
Mm-hmm.
So the rebranding of language, usually what happens is if they use a word that has a definite meaning, people actually know what they mean when they say it. And when they realize that people actually know what they mean, they rebrand it as something new. When people catch on, they change it. And they eventually change it to the point that people no longer have any idea what they're talking about. It's just meaningless jargon, like the term disposition matrix. What the hell does that mean, right? So it began as, well, he's got a hit list, a kill hit list.
Right.
Well, people know what that means, so we better rebrand it because they don't like it. So it sounds cuter and sweeter and fairer and more democratic when they start changing the language. And the language becomes so convoluted that people can't make sense of it anymore. And when that happens, critical thinking, people aren't capable of it because they're trying to sift through words and phrases that are meaningless. And when that happens, they have to revert back to the emotional connection, which is always fear-based. And that's how you emotionally manipulate people. And you can't emotionally manipulate people that have proper knowledge. It's not possible, which is why they try to keep that away from us as much as they can.
Very well said. Periodically tonight, I'm going to read some prophetic material, and the people that listen to this show on a regular basis will know who this prophetic material comes from. This particular material was written in February 28, 1987. The point in time at which these prophecies will begin to be fulfilled will be when a pope no longer resides in Rome. All of Europe will then fall victim to a terrible punishment by evil powers. The Christian religion will collapse, and the churches and the monasteries will end up in ruins and ashes. Monstrous forces will be created by science and will be released by the military forces, and armies as well as by terrorists will cause great destruction. DHS is planning for some kind of widespread unrest in the United States, and I entitled the show Civil War in America, and I kind of put that as a question mark. And I'd like to ask James, what kind of widespread unrest in the United States do you think we might see in the near future?
I think they were going to have a hostile alien invasion, but I think that that's been put on the back burner because too many good people stood up and talked about it and shown how ridiculous and absurd that is. It's like so many other things that they have thought that they could get past the people. And if they put this crap out and then they poll to see what the effect is, and if it isn't selling, they draw back. Now they're desperate. Now what they want to do is they want to create these false flags to make everybody feel like if we don't get your guns, all these maniacs are going to kill you. And that isn't true, never has been true. They kill more people with vaccinations than could ever be killed by guns if the maniacs were all armed. We have maniacs. Why are they maniacs? They're maniacs primarily because the pharmaceutical industry make them maniacs. I mean, why haven't they taken Prozac off the market? If there was any sense at all to what is going on now, if there was any sincerity whatsoever about what is going on now, then guns would be the least concern.
Right.
Because, first of all, it's part of the social contract. Why is it part of the social contract? Because when the government oversteps its social contract with the people, people may have to use guns to put it back in line with the social contract. And that's what's happening right now. We have a government that is illegal in so many ways it isn't funny. We have a society that is controlled by people that work at cross purposes with the welfare of this nation. And now, rather than face the music of their evil, of the results and the effects and consequences of their evil, they want to get rid of us. They'll tell you that the earth can't support the population we have today. Well, the way that they speculate in food commodities, raising the prices to reflect market gains, and other disgustingly unethical and inhuman practices like genetic engineering of food, not to make it better in any way, but to harm you. So many things going on, so many things that are just beyond belief that people throw their hands up and walk away. They don't want to hear it. Well, they have to. You can't put something behind you by denying it. And that's why we're in this mess today. I believe that everybody that realizes the difference in the quality of life that they have obtained in the last 20 years, and that know why. Why? Because industry has been taken from this country. We buy more than we sell. The job market is just crashed. The statistics are rotten. They're not true. There is absolutely no reason to trust anybody in Congress today, especially in the White House, because they don't deal in reality. They don't deal in truth. They don't deal in honor. They don't deal in the national interest whatsoever. Their idea of the national interest is padding their pockets and providing for their immediate family, and to hell with the rest of us. That's so evident. There maybe is a handful of exceptions, but they are a handful. And it is time for people to realize that they have nothing to lose by taking a stand. Whatever you do, no shots, no vaccinations, don't eat corn. So many things that you have to protect yourself from, like the first rainfall after chemtrails, it is endless, because the assault on the American public today, if they were advised, would have already caused a rebellion.
You know, I would like to add to that, but
Crystal,
to make
I keep
sure...
hearing the sirens. Is that from you in the background?
I think so.
It's an interesting backdrop. It's kind of a strange irony that I'm hearing. Go ahead. You wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, I do, but to really drive the point home, if you could rephrase the question before I do it so that people can really make the connection, I would appreciate it.
Okay, what I said was the DHS is planning on some kind of widespread unrest in the United States, and I asked James to comment on that widespread unrest.
Yes, and that's very important because they are expecting something, and I really want people to understand where this is coming from. Did you ever see the interview that Bill Gates did where he tried to sell death panels, where he explained, well, gee, do we really want to, give Granny 5 more years of life at the cost of $1 million, or do we want to hire 10 more teachers? And it was in that moment of his arrogance that he let the cat out of the bag, because after he said that, he said, well, we have to sacrifice the middle class. And
really?
This is the connection that people need to make between population reduction and the economy, because these people are telling people, again, it's emotional manipulation to get them to participate in their own demise. They are telling people that the middle class is the reason for the widespread planetary destruction because of all the appliances and cars and computers that they buy. And when you think about how ironic that is, because, well, he's a billionaire, and you can be pretty damn sure he made that money off of the middle class.
Mm-hmm.
But he has no problem turning his back on us now. The reason that this is a lie is because the idea that we're polluting the planet because of consumerism, this is an absolute lie because corporations and their greed have built everything around the philosophy of planned obsolescence. So you know as well as I do that if you buy a computer today, how long is it going to last before you buy another one? But we know that they have the ability to make them last forever. We've seen it with cars. Those cars would last forever. They're throwaway cars now. The computers are throwaway. Look, I tried to get around this myself because it's so irritating, but the printer cartridges, people think, oh my God, the printer's only $30, but the cartridges is where the consumable aspect comes in. And I just hate the fact that my printer will tell me my cartridge is out of ink, but when I take it out and look at it, there's easily a third of the ink left in it. It's all about planned obsolescence, and it's corporate greed that is causing the problem on top of the destruction of the environment. So the destruction of the middle class is coming from eugenicists who believe that it's our endless consumerism that is causing the planet to be raped of its resources to provide more goods. But in fact, they make sure that we have to buy more goods sooner than we should through shoddy workmanship to increase their profits. And on top of this, and this is really so important to understand to get around the propaganda, they are destroying nature to destroy us.
Yes.
This is where HARP comes in, all of the massive fish die-offs, and the HARP technology is destroying crops around the world. You see, they are purposefully destroying our food sources so that we actually will get to a time where they can be honest and say, well, now there's not enough resources for everyone. But what they won't tell you is that they made sure.
Absolutely. Crystal, you were kind of talking about the economy being bad, and the Federal Reserve is printing $40 billion per month on an indefinite basis. In my opinion, is that will lead to an economic crisis. And I wondered if you could comment on that.
Well, the economic crisis is planned, which goes back to what I was just saying. The destruction of the middle class is purposeful. And, that's the way they're doing it. But of course we know that once the Federal Reserve took over printing our money, we became a slave to a third party. Literal slaves. We're financial slaves. And the easiest way I found to explain this to people is, so you go get a loan for, let's say, a $100 toaster at 18% interest, and you have 10 years to pay it back. You're going to end up paying $3,000 for that toaster. And while the money was printed for the original part of the loan, the $100, the interest is never printed. And why this is important is because it pits us against each other to find whatever way we can to rob each other of that money to pay it back, because we can't do it any other way. Do you see what I'm saying? It creates an overly competitive and corrupt society, because the only way for you to pay off a loan to which the interest to pay it was never printed is to get that money from someone else. It automatically creates a very hostile capitalistic environment. But again, people have to understand that the destruction of the middle class is incredibly important. It's part of their eugenic program and their depopulation program, and the goal is to get to a point where people are too poor and too hungry to fight back, and at that point they will be so locked into self-preservation mode they will not complain when their competitors for food are removed from the equation.
James, do you have any comment on the Federal Reserve printing $40 billion per month?
What's most important about hyperinflation is, of course, they're printing too much. And of course, it's not backed by a damn thing. They told economists 30 years ago, and we've always had good economists, they told them that don't worry about balance of payments deficit, don't worry about industry being shipped overseas, don't worry about Americans buying more than they're selling. And of course, this is sound economic formula to balance the sheet every year, to have a balance of payments deficit that's zero. Well, they put that on its head. And they told the economists that work for corporations, think tanks, whatever, and academic institutions, oh, don't worry about that. We have the petrodollar. We put together an arrangement called OPEC. And all these member nations of OPEC have agreed to buy their oil for American dollars only. So that will prop up the dollar. Let us do what we want in the way of social engineering. Let us deindustrialize the United States, because we are, dealing with the greenhouse effect Now it's global warming. Next week it'll be something else. Let us do all this. Don't worry about it. We know what we're doing. Yeah, they knew what they were doing. They were doing two things. They were controlling, they were maintaining the oil industry, serving the oil industry, taking over the Middle East. They had a plan in mind, which they're executing now, to take over every nation in the Middle East that has oil and to freeze out Russia and China. And Russia and China don't like that. So what nation has the sweetest oil on earth? Iran. They would like nothing better, and also has a number of other things they never mentioned. So what we have here is global dominance getting off the runway. They got off the runway with economics. They got off the runway with social engineering in this country, with education, if you want to call it that, cheap babysitting, and indoctrination of these kids. These kids despise it as much as you or I would. It's a laugh. And they'll tell you that. You ought to listen to them.
Very interesting indeed, folks. I think we're going to start taking some calls. And the first caller, if you can state your name and where you're calling from.
My name is Nemo from Baltimore.
Nemo, go ahead and ask the question.
I got a question for Crystal.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, I've been watching all this propaganda from behind the scenes, like all this like drama going on with the truth movement and all the media and the shadow government, and I've been just watching this carefully in the background for a while, and I see that it's not going anywhere. I don't see. It looks like that they have too much money and too many people backing them up to go against people like us, and I don't think it's going to go anywhere. I want to see what you would say. What do you have to say about that?
Well, I mean, I know that there are people who are going to take this the wrong way, and I don't mean for them to, but the truth of the matter is that the major debacle we call Sandy Hook really did us all a favor, because it makes it painfully obvious how much propaganda there is. Those people are actors. The Jessica Lynch, Saving Private Lynch, Jerry Bruckheimer produced that. It wasn't real. The woman who testified in front of Congress about Saddam Hussein, dropping the babies on the floor so they would die, was an actor. And at the time, I did a radio show about this in 2011 on Veritas, where I talked about these actors. And at the time, it was very hard for people to take that seriously, but the way that these actors were used during Sandy Hook, something happened. I don't know what it was. Personally, I think that it was intended. They had somebody that they had intended to really shoot these children, and at the last minute didn't do it and ran. And I think that's the guy they caught running, saying, "I didn't do it." I think he was supposed to, but he didn't do it. And then they scrambled to try to fix it, to sell it. And they made so many mistakes that people caught on really fast.
But here's my gistic. Like, I understand a lot of this, like what you're talking about with psych ops and how you can. My question is, I don't see the truth movement winning in this. It's like everyone's stuck in their homes. They took over the law system, where if we do anything, we're gonna get locked up. I've been locked up 40, 50 times in my life. It's crazy. There's nothing. I do not see people winning over this. They have too much money, and I want to know what you think about that.
Well, I'd like to hear what James has to say. James, do you have any comment on this?
Well, all you have to do is look at all of their actions. They're afraid of us. I'll tell you what. When you have right on your side, when you're protecting your family, and when you are doing your best to survive, you have power. You have what is called righteousness. We had that in World War II. We have had this and demonstrated our courage, demonstrated our determination, demonstrated our resolve over and over again, and that's how this country came about. It was born out of fire. Let's not let it die in fire. But there will be a struggle. There will be a struggle. And it's a good idea for you to decide where in that struggle you want to be. I don't think you have much choice if you know anything about what's going on at all. I think there are a lot of people on the inside of this monstrosity the monsters have built up that are coming to terms with it and are ready, if they've got any place to go to for support, out here among us, are ready to defect.
You know, I think the caller made a lot of good points. I think it was Nemo. Nemo, thanks for your call. Sometimes I get discouraged a little bit with the lack of awakeness that people have, and it seems like the public is so hypnotized at times.
There's something he said I would like to address very quickly that I think will maybe give Nemo also a little bit more hope. Sure. I can't tell you how many people, one person at a time, have made a huge difference. And what he was just saying about the difference that he made, over and over and over again, people are told they can't make a difference, but they do. But they have to get involved to do it. And now is the time to do that, because I will tell you, I'm not resigned personally to the idea of a civil war and a very bloody battle, because I think that we have not exhausted the resources we have to avoid that. But we have to get people involved to really explore that option. You know what I mean? You know, even James Horak many years ago received a videotape about how they had planned to institute martial law on Y2K. He was one man. He took that videotape and he sent it to every member of Congress and Mayor Rudy Giuliani and told them they all got a copy and they didn't go through with it. And that was what one man did. So that's the thing. People really can make a difference, but they actually have to show up first.
Yeah, you know, it's true. I took self-responsibility, and that's why I started this radio show. And it continues to shock me, the people that are listening. And I wanted to ask James about something. James, there is more and more legislation that's coming in place to censor the Internet. And I wondered if you could comment about that, James.
Well, of course there is. We all had to anticipate that. We need to establish relationships where we can keep in touch with people that we have found are in agreement with our purposes and our intentions and our ethics, our morality, our principles. We need to have alternative ways of communicating, and they're there. There always is. But the important thing is you have to expect this. They have tried a number of things. They've been trying a number of things now for 50 years that haven't washed. It's on the fast track now because I think it's do or die for them. A lot of things that they had in the wings, bases on Mars, bases on the moon, they're all gone. They don't have that anymore. They have deep underground bases, but they're vulnerable. You know, I think the people that build them, the people that operate them, do not let the elite in on the big secrets of just how vulnerable they are. But Russia knows how vulnerable they are. China knows how vulnerable they are. And I don't think that they are really sold on the idea of being dominated by these monsters. They have a criminal element. They have problems and everything. But their interests don't lie with these monsters, as is shown. Now, I think that the monsters believe that China will fall in line because we are their biggest debtor. And, you know, they have it fixed in their head that debt will control anybody, that you can control anybody through debt. Not the Chinese. No way. If you go back and you study history, you know about the Opium Wars.
Right.
And you know about the Boxer Rebellion. If you know about these things, you know that China is unique. The Chinese people are unique. And no matter who may seem to be running the show there, they are not compelled by leadership any more than back when in the last few years of Mao's life. They have a collective of leadership, more so than the Soviet Union had, and they don't make decisions on the basis of emotion, or they don't make it on money or anything. They make it on what is best for the stability of the social structure in China. And that's the way they run their business. So China isn't in the bag for the New World Order. Russia isn't in the bag for the New World Order. And you better bet that most of the nations that are in the Middle East are not in bed with the New World Order, or they may seem to be. But no, they have been aggravated too much by American and Zionist intrigue to ever want that element running their life.
I want to ask Crystal, the ISP internet service providers are starting to monitor what we are downloading, and I wondered if you could comment on some of this legislation to censor the internet.
Well, this is about our modern version of thought police. And I think this is another important thing for people to really kind of grasp, is that we are operating in a version of reality that is dictated to us by the people whose positions of power are maintained and defended by this reality, which is, again, the dichotomy, the master and slave construct. And we are never taught anything that would get us out of it. The surveillance and the monitoring of our communications is eventually going to move more and more into the thought police, which we actually saw that very blatantly when one of the officers in the Sandy Hook shooting said, anybody who disagrees with this will be prosecuted. Do you remember that?
Wow.
Yeah, he said anybody who, doesn't agree with our official story here and posts anything about it will be prosecuted. Well, millions of people posted about it, so good luck with that. But I personally recently had to purchase a new computer because mine was infected with a virus that wiped everything off of it, and I ended up having to purchase a computer with Windows 8. Now people know that most software comes with a terms and conditions, but Windows 8 is cloud-based, and aside from the terms and conditions, it also has a behavioral policy aside from that. And the thing that people don't understand about cloud computing is that when you are forced to work through the cloud, your access to the cloud can be cut off. And of course, people have talked about this many years ago when they talked about Internet 2 coming. And Internet 2 is not just coming, it's here. But it's the frog in the water syndrome. So, for example, there are movies that we can watch here that other countries can't watch. It's being compartmentalized. But we are going to get to a place where the thought police are going to be so intense that our access to the Internet will literally be cut off if we are saying things and expressing things that will help people get outside of the reality box. And really what we're talking about is the modern-day version of witch hunts and inquisitions, because that's what that was all about. People were behaving in ways that were not sanctioned by the system, and they were punished for it. And what's happening with the Internet now is a move to begin doing that again. And I think the other really important thing about that is this is something that we really can't let happen, because the Internet is really a massive global mind. And through us bypassing the mainstream media and the controllers saying, the Iranians hate you. Well, we can go online and talk to an Iranian. And they're like, no, we don't. We just both hate our government.
Right.
So we're bypassing that system of control, which is why Internet censorship is such a big deal for the powers that be right now. And if we don't stop it, it will happen.
Boy, and I'm so far outside the reality box. Boy, my number is up, man. I'm so far down the rabbit hole, it's incredible. So I'll definitely be marked for that. Oh, and I wanted to tell James I did finally order some potassium iodine. And James, why don't you comment on that and let people know? We've only got about 10 minutes left in the show, but I think it's important that they don't forget about Fukushima and forget about what's going on there.
Yes, I recommend everyone, wherever you live, whatever your circumstance, that you start taking legal solution with potassium iodine. It's not expensive. It's more expensive than it was, but it is the only treatment for radiation sickness, and that was determined in the 50s by the Atomic Energy Commission. It is the reason that people could continue working at Chernobyl at the other end of the reactor that went China, reactor number 2. And it kept going for another 12 years after Chernobyl went China. Well, when they finally shut that one down after 12 years, they found the reactor core of number 1 on top of the cooling tower. Now, the only reason that those people that continued working there survived was that they were taking potassium iodide. And a genuine Lugol solution contains potassium iodide. The important thing that it does is it prevents an isotope of iodine, iodine-131, from storing in the thyroid. It will kill the thyroid, and the thyroid will have to be removed. And then you lose the first immunity, the first form of immunity, blood immunity you have. The only one you have remaining is in the small intestine, and that can be wiped out with antibiotics. So you're very, very vulnerable, and one of the most important things to remember about Lugol solution is it's been used as a cure-all by people around the world for 50, 60 years. It is effective, it's harmless, abide by the dosages that are recommended, but buy it and use it every day. Take it in milk, or if you can't take it in milk, take it in fruit juice. But it'll protect you. It is your first line of defense. And men that are low on testosterone cannot make testosterone if they have a deficiency of iodine. And a lot of us do. So that's another good thing. It will lessen the chance of most viral diseases having their way with you. It's an immune protector, or an immunity protector.
Boy, that's some great advice. I can't wait till mine gets here. I want to thank both of our guests tonight. I want to thank both Crystal Clark and James Horak for coming on the show this evening. James's website is embsinfoblogspot.com, and Crystal's is drowninginabsurdity.wordpress.com. I want to thank all the folks that are listening. You've been listening to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snider. Have a good evening.